Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. In this short audio presentation, we're going to continue our conversation about pricing and profit. So there are many pricing methods that we can consider. These include cost-based, value-based, competition-based, demand-based, and differentiation pricing. And it is important that you have at least a basic understanding of the differences between them. And your textbook goes into more details on a variety of different pricing methods and strategies. You don't have to have them all completely and utterly memorized, but you should at least be able to recognize them such that if you saw a definition, you'd be able to link it back to which pricing method or strategy we're talking about. So we're going to walk through these relatively quickly. Cost-based pricing is fairly straightforward. The seller determines the total cost of producing one unit and then adds an amount to markup, usually as a percentage of total costs. This is a very common retail strategy where retail pricing often looks something like 50% markup on cost. And it also is significantly affected by how many units you expect to sell. So in the case of t-shirt projects with underground printing, for example, if you're only expecting to sell 5 of them, then this markup cost-based pricing results in a relatively high price for a t-shirt because there's a high fixed cost of creating the design and the shirts in the first place. But if you're going to sell 100 of them, then it can result in a lower price. Key flaws in this are you often leave money on the table for high-value products, and disciplined entrepreneurship tends to recommend against cost-based pricing, and it's often very inexact. What is the right markup to use? It's a really simple system, which is often very helpful for entrepreneurs as they're first getting started, but do be aware of some of its limitations. Value-based pricing is much more sophisticated. It requires that you really understand how customers benefit from your product or service, especially if you have a novel product, something that customers have never seen before. They may not know how much value they're going to get out of it. This is a powerful way to do pricing, often because it combines customers getting a large share of the benefit, but also gives you a much better idea of what pricing your customers will actually bear. Keep in mind that you usually have to do significant research in order to get to a value-based pricing outcome. Competition-based pricing, we mentioned previously, it's pretty straightforward. It's on the assumption that there are competitors out there with reasonably similar products, and you can look and see how those are priced and price similarly. Any kind of market situation where many organizations or individuals are selling roughly similar products or services usually also suggest that price is a pretty important customer consideration, and they can easily switch from one to another. Demand-based pricing is, again, more complicated, but you're obviously very familiar with it if you've ever flown on an airplane. It's based on the amount of customer demand. When demand is high, prices rise, and when demand is low, prices fall. So every summer, airline prices tend to go up because more people are flying for holidays and vacations. Airline prices tend to go way up during things like the Christmas holiday season when people have off of school and work. And this can be a really effective way of generating higher profits because arguably the service or product is exactly the same, but because more people want it, people are willing to pay higher prices for it. And then, of course, there's price differentiation, where you can set different prices in segmented markets based on characteristics. If you know that certain types of people tend to purchase products at specific times, or there are different characteristics, or they're using a different distribution channel, you can then offer mechanisms in which people will pay different prices. Here's a really simple example in which this particular product is offering AARP members a discount. It's important to recognize that there is a difference between price differentiation and price discrimination, in which you attempt to charge people different prices based on characteristics that could be illegal. So for example, if you were to attempt to sell products and charge a higher price to people based on something like race or ethnicity or gender or sexuality, that can technically be illegal, and you need to be aware of that distinction. One of the key things that entrepreneurs have to do is discover price. That is, they have to figure out what price is going to work. What price will generate as much profit as we can and still accomplish our overall goals of selling at a volume that works. You want to use data and information, so think about your persona, study the purchase process. Is there a budget authority at the organization that determines how purchases are made? Think about how they purchase alternatives. Obviously, you want to look at competitors. If you can legally discriminate on price, you may choose to do that. Try whenever possible to avoid special and early pricing unless you need to do so to generate buzz or early sales. And if you do, try to keep that secret. The reason is because it is always easier to lower your price than to raise your price. And so this is the comment I made earlier about how entrepreneurs often want to charge the lowest price they think they can because they want to undercut competition. But in fact, we strongly encourage entrepreneurs to try to charge the highest price they can at the beginning, and if necessary, to lower their price later on. If you can change the value proposition, that is, something about what you're doing is more valuable to your customers, you may be able to raise your price. And if there are switching costs, then that will also help you to raise your prices. Pricing's an entrepreneurial talent, right? It's not a perfect science. Obviously, there are very sophisticated systems for pricing in some industries. Airline pricing, for example, uses big data and significant machine learning technologies in order to try to price exactly to fill planes without overselling them. But usually for entrepreneurs, the challenge is to avoid having your price be too low, such that you're leaving profits on the table, or that your price is too high, such that you're missing out on sales. Now, your book goes into describes some aspects of different pricing methods, and we wanted to provide you with some additional thinking about pricing strategies. Again, we want you to recognize what these are. You don't need to understand absolutely everything about them. I'm going to go through a couple of them relatively quickly. Just make sure you understand the distinctions between these strategies such that you could recognize them if a definition is provided to you. These pricing strategies involve new product pricing, differential pricing, psychological pricing, product line pricing, and promotional pricing. So new product pricing strategy is pretty straightforward. Either we're using a strategy like skimming, where we're trying to charge the highest possible price during an introduction stage because people are excited about it. You might imagine, for example, the new iPhone release. Or what's called penetration pricing, where we're setting a low price in order to quickly build market share. Differential pricing strategy is quite different. It's where we are charging different prices to different buyers based on segment characteristics. This might be something we can accomplish through negotiation, or there might be multiple markets that people are purchasing through, or we can use some kind of discounting method, anything from coupons or even random discounting systems in order to try to encourage people to shop more often. Psychological pricing, something that you've probably seen, things like the fact that the gas station price is always whatever the price is, 0.9 cents, like $2.49.9 cents or something like that. And that's because we're trying to suggest that the price is actually quite cheaper than it really is. Cars are often priced that way, $14,999 to make it seem like it's not $15,000. Multiple unit pricing, where you have you charge a single price for more than one of the item. Reference pricing is where you try to price a product specifically against a more expensive model. Sometimes you see this in grocery stores where generic products are placed right next to on the shelf to a brand product and then priced slightly lower. Bundling, where you offer multiple things at once. For example, when you go to the movie theater and it's $4 for a soda and $5 for popcorn, but it's only $7 if you buy both. Everyday low pricing was really something that was created by Walmart about 25 years ago. The idea that there would simply be one price and it would pretty much always be the same and it would not go on sale. And then there's, of course, customary pricing, which is just when things are priced based on how they've always been priced. Product line pricing is trying to set pricing for a series of products within a product line. If you've already have captive customers, you can price where they're purchasing something that's priced relatively low, but there's other related items that are more expensive. Good, better, best pricing based on is often called premium pricing, or what's called price lining, where there's specific price breaks for different kinds of goods. And then finally, promotional pricing, where you have price leaders, where you have products that people buy all the time. You might sell them at a lower price in order to get them into the store, or there's special event pricing or comparison discounting, where you're specifically saying this price is compared to the higher price we used to charge at another time. I want you to recognize, however, that pricing is not always immediately obvious. This is a great little story, and I'm going to follow this with the video, which is, I think, about 2 minutes long, 2 minutes and 30 seconds long, in which the Humane Society of Silicon Valley was thinking about this question of pricing, where they were charging $25 or $40 for a cat or dog adoption. And their goal was to increase adoption and decrease returns, right? So sometimes people make adoptions and then they feel like things don't work out and they return the animal. And obviously their goal is to have as many animals adopted as possible. So given this pricing, you might imagine, what would they do in order to try to increase adoptions and decrease returns? So take a moment to think about that, and then the video will start in just a second, and then we'll come back and finish this up.
There's another thing you did, speaking of cats, that I'd love to talk about. You changed your pricing strategy for adoptions. Talk about that a little bit, because I think that's another interesting case of pattern recognition for those that are thinking about private, for-profit entrepreneurial ventures versus social entrepreneurship. You're using similar analytics there to make a pricing decision.
So when I first started, our adoption prices, I think, were $25 for a cat and $40 for a dog. And about 5 years after I started, the CVMA, the California Veterinary Medical Association, actually completed a study in looking at, basically their study was around what types of animals get turned into shelters. But there was a little offshoot to that, which looked at how much people actually paid for the animal to begin with. And there was this correlation around the less that people paid for the animal, the more likely they are to turn it in, because it's not worth as much. So we made a strategic decision to raise our prices. And again, it was one of those outcries where, board staff is going, oh my God, you can't raise prices. I mean, who's going to pay more for a 6-year-old dog? But the whole concept is that if people pay more, they believe they're getting a better product. It's interesting. And they're much more likely to keep that product. We also made the strategic decision to say we're not going to continue to sanction that that message that's being sent that cats are not as important as dogs, so that you pay less for cats and more for dogs. So the first year, sort of out of the chute, we raised our prices from $25 and $40 to $110 for both a dog and a cat. And what was amazing about the first year is that we had a 10% increase in the number of adoptions we did and a 50% decrease in the returns of animals to the Humane Society. So it really has played out that, the more you pay, people think it's a better product and people want to come to you. Yeah. So we've continued to sort of lead the way in Santa Clara County with the highest adoption prices in the county.
That's a good one.
So hopefully that gave you an example of a different approach to pricing, given the goals that the Humane Society was trying to accomplish. An example of pricing that you are probably very familiar with is, of course, free pricing models. That is, situations in which companies give away their product or service apparently for free. And there's a variety of different pricing models associated with this: freemium, shareware, and adware. All of which you're probably very familiar with because the advent of the internet dramatically changed how organizations began using free pricing models. Typically, this is used for products with an extremely low marginal cost, such as software or access to online services. But it is important to remember that just because you're getting the product for free or someone is getting the product for free doesn't mean that someone is paying for it somewhere. And I want to make sure that you directly recognize what this actually looks like. What I want to show you very quickly is the fact that for all of the online services that you have access to, there is a price to be paid. And I want to very explicitly show you what that price looks like. I'm hopeful that some of you have done this before or are familiar with this. I know that you're aware that online advertising and things like that are prevalent, but you may never have seen it quite as explicitly here before. If you've never done this, then I strongly encourage you at some point in time to look a little bit more into the issues of online privacy and how your data becomes available to other organizations. In this case, I'm going to use a product called Ghostery, which I'm comfortable with. You don't have to use it yourself, but it's pretty well established. Ghostery is a extension that you can use in Chrome or Firefox that keeps track of who is tracking you. So for example, what I've got here is I'm going to switch windows so that you can see I've opened up a Chrome browser window with a website that perhaps you use once in a while, which is CNN. And so here is this current headline on CNN.com. And you may think I'm just hanging out here looking at CNN and no one's really paying attention to what I'm doing. Maybe you're logged into Google and so you figure Google probably knows you're at CNN.com, but that's probably it. Well, in fact, here's Ghostery installed over here, and that's this little ghost thing. And what Ghostery is doing is it is keeping track of what organizations are paying CNN in order to be able to see information about people who browse to the CNN site. And you might notice there's this number here, which is 56. Well, what on earth does that mean? That means that there are 56 different trackers on this website making a note of what you're doing. And by clicking on them, you can actually see what they all are. So look at, there's Google, of course, but all these other organizations, some of which you may be familiar with, like Amazon, although I don't know if that's Amazon specifically or a separate organization called Amazon Associates. But then you're probably discovering dozens and dozens and dozens of other organizations that you may never have heard of before in your life that are getting access to what you're doing every time you go to this kind of site. You need to understand that free is not really free, that by accepting free access to, for example, CNN.com, you are letting all of these organizations know how you are spending your time. And some of them are so sophisticated that they may be able to identify you personally based on your browsing behavior. So does that mean that you shouldn't browse the internet? No, of course that doesn't mean you shouldn't browse the internet, but you should be sophisticated about what free actually means and how organizations get access to the data and learn about your behavior. And if you've ever wondered how you, for example, were at Amazon looking something up and maybe didn't buy it right away, and then you went to another website like CNN or to some other place, and an ad popped up on the side for a very similar product or the exact same product that you were just looking at, that is how this is happening. And you should be aware that that's how that actually works. So, our key summary about pricing is that there are many possible pricing objectives, strategies, and choices. It's good to recognize the value of prior experience in pricing and being extremely familiar with your customers. Wherever possible, you want to test with experimentation and use break-even calculation to think carefully about how much you need to sell in order for your business to be successful.